Welcome to the Consummate Athlete Podcast, where we explore what it means to be a well-rounded, happy, goal-crushing athlete. Every week, myself, sports journalist Molly Herford, and cycling coach and kinesiologist Peter Glassford interview experts and chat through all of your training questions. We're excited to have you along for the ride. Hello. Welcome back to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. Peter, how's it going?
It's going. I'm excited to be here. We're talking about a series that I spent a lot of time watching last year.
Which, to be honest, I was pretty surprised about because normally you're not like a huge consumer of a ton of cycling
I don't
video.
watch a lot of bike racing. We talk to a lot of people who are big cycling fans, and thank you for that because it is the sport we you cover and I coach. But yeah, I've always been into training of sports, so I'll still keep up on baseball training and ultimate fighting championships and that sort of thing, but I don't watch any of that stuff. But yeah, for some reason, this Call of a Lifetime series, it just seemed like it was a good one. It seemed like something that was a big moment in our North American cycling, whether you are into it or you have feelings.
Yes, exactly. And I think, most people really got really amped up on a lot of the races that they got to see. And I think it's actually also, it was really helpful because you have tons of clients who do Leadville and Unbound. Both races were profiled in season 1 of Call of a Lifetime. In fact, if you are racing either Leadville or Unbound, we do have plans that actually start in January to get you ready for those. They're both available on consummateathlete.com. I think they're pretty recently highlighted because they started this month. So very easy to find. We'll link to them in the show notes.
And in the show notes, we'll have a link or a code for 25% off, but you'll have to find that in the show notes. We won't tell you on the call here. So there you
sneaky.
go. And that's off of any of our plans in the Training Peak. So if you're not doing that event, you can get any of our other event plans or goal-based plans in the Training Peak store.
Awesome. So today, the reason we're talking about Call of a Lifetime and the Lifetime Grandprix series is because we have Shannon Vandivier on. He is actually the founder of Cold Collaborative, and he's the guy that he pitched Lifetime on the series, the Call of a Lifetime series, and you know what? I'm going to say it didn't sound as corny 2 years ago, Drive to Survive, but for cyclists. I know every sport now has Drive to Survive, but for.
Well, I mean that you can say that, but then also it's like, well, it is working. I think, I'm watching it and obviously Drive to Survive did great, but there's lots of these other ones that, people have told me about the Tour de France one that's on Netflix. And obviously that model works.
For sure. Well, I thought about it as I was like kind of joking about it. I was like, well, you know what? Like the first reality show, it's not like, I mean, think about how that went, right? Every pitch after that would be like, okay, it's like, and I don't know what.
Well, or anything, the
Big Brother
the
was
whole
Big Brother.
Home and Garden channel. No offense if you work there, but I mean, it's like do it yourself for tiny homes, do it yourself in this city, do it yourself for whatever.
Paint it all white, put down a chevron floor, bump it up, bump it out.
That's right.
Anyway, so Shannon also really got back into cycling himself during the course of the series. He actually kind of started riding again almost a year ago now, and actually did a race in the fall. So we talk about what his journey looked like, how that changed the filming. But I mean, this is just a really fun episode for anyone who's watched Call of a Lifetime, anyone who's been interested in the Lifetime Grandprix series. I think we really get kind of a behind the scenes look at what goes into filming something like this. But also, I think Shannon's just fascinating in terms of what he's done with his career, but also really his re-entry to bikes and what that looked like for him. So I think it's a really, really fun conversation.
Cool.
All right. So with that, let's get into it. Enjoy this episode with Shannon and make sure that you check out Call of a Lifetime season 2. It dropped on January 26th. So a couple days before this episode went live or goes live. However, I should say that depending on when you're listening to it. And of course, head over to consummateathlete.com to grab the show notes or just pull it up in whatever podcast player you're listening to if you want to check out training plans for Unbound, Leadville, or any other event you possibly have coming up. All right, let's get into it.
I found so much freedom in organization, which in a way on the surface might look like a trap, but it's actually freedom.
Oh my gosh. You're speaking my language. Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh my gosh. Cool.
You're pioneering. You're one of my role models on that front. So, and nobody listening right now has any context to what we're talking about, but hey, cheers to that.
Exactly. And I mean, like with that said, let's kick this right off. I feel like our organizational bent here is very important to the podcast because I think we're both going to talk about the fact that that's why we're able to do all of the work we do and still find time to ride and do all of that stuff.
Totally. Yeah.
And that does not come easy. So
No.
Shannon, let's start with your intro. Like, who the heck are you? How did you come to bikes and film? How did Cold Collaborative start? All the things.
Cool. Yeah. Loaded question. Well,
I know, right?
We could go 5 different routes here. Born and raised in Austin, Texas. Had a unique upbringing in the sense that a lot of the people hanging around the dinner table were Pulitzer Prize winning photographers and what have you. My dad had a successful career as a photojournalist. And so from just like a very young age, while I'm like playing with my GI Joes under the table or whatever, like I've always just been exposed to seeing the world through a lens. And that's so much to the framework of my background, and what's led me down the path that I'm on is I don't know that I ever had a choice. I certainly went to college. I definitely like started off as a finance major and then like slowly whittled my way more into a creative field, which was biology and biochemistry. I ended up getting my undergrad in that, thought I was going to go to med school, and then just totally pulled a fast one on my then wife. We had just been married. She thought she was going to marry a doctor. And I was like, dude, I went and visited the med school, and I thought, this is not the lifestyle. Like, I was not made this way. I was cut from a very different cloth. And that was to really not have an office. And I think that I saw a lot of pitfalls in that path ahead. And just from my background, the cool thing was through college, I paid off my college before I got out of college with photography. I would go shoot a wedding, or I'd go, just whatever the gig was, like it was cool. My dad, of course, hooked me up. I think I was 15 when I had my first image published in a magazine. And that was cool. So I had some clients already in college, and something I was able to maintain.
I love that. Now, wait, do you think like the finance and the bio stuff were like, you were just trying so hard to like fight against the like doing the same thing as your dad?
Well, like 100%. Like when you're, what is that? When I'm 18 years old, the last place I want to be is still under my parents' thumb, right? And so like my perception of freedom was probably moving in the opposite direction of everything that I thought was constraint, which was like, oh, dad doesn't want me to go. My dad told me, he's like, son, you don't need college. In fact, I paid for my own college. And that's because he said, I've taught you a trade. You're a dang good photographer, and you can make a career out of this. You don't need college. And so, but of course, like a good father, said, you follow the path that you want to follow. And so, of course, I wanted to go hang out with friends, and I wanted to do the normal, like, you're supposed to go to college thing. If I had a time machine, maybe I wouldn't go to college knowing what I know now, but that's impossible, right? In my 18-year-old mindset, I just wanted to get away from my parents, and I wanted to start, creating some footprints in this world that I could call my own. Mm-hmm. And so absolutely went down a path that I eventually realized was not the right path. And the first thing I did out of when I decided I wasn't going to go to med school, already like at this point, 6 months married, of course, the panic of being married and being a provider and all that kind of stuff sets in. And so I started a wedding photography company, and that was like 2012, something like that. And
okay.
Yeah, that lasted all the way, maybe earlier, 2011. Anyways, that lasted all the way until like 2019 or so. And it was my sister was my partner. And it was fun because, again, like dad being a Nat Geo photographer had some good street cred when people are thinking of hiring you for their weddings. And we had a pretty successful career there, but it actually ended up being the thing that I siphoned money from to start a production company, because my whole vision long-term was I was never fully satisfied with just a still image. I always felt like from a young age, and we can unpack a lot of that there if you want follow-up questions, but I always felt like I couldn't quite see the full story with just a still image. And that is eventually, that frustration is what pushed me into video. And I'm a product of YouTube University, and didn't study film in school or anything like that. I just went to YouTube University. So.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Now we do have to kind of backtrack and say, like you mentioned, following in footsteps, but really you're following like tire treads too. You started in BMX as a kid too, right? Like let's establish some bike
Yeah.
credibility here too.
Yeah, let's speak to our demographic here for a second.
Exactly.
Yeah, so but like any 90s kid, right? Like we were both born in 87. Like,
yeah,
man, like I have so much nostalgia growing up. I grew up in a neighborhood that was total suburbia. You're maybe 20 feet from the next house. You're in a neighborhood full of kids. Everything we did was on the bike. Everything.
Yep.
It was also that era where, like I would leave the house at sunrise and not come back till sunset. My parents had no idea where I was. I was 9 years old, cruising around the neighborhood, a ranch backed up to the neighborhood. We would build forts and get in all sorts of trouble out there, dodge snakes and catch snakes and what have you. And so the bike was the vector for everything. And so eventually, like I started like any other like 90s like boy at that time. And I'm sure some girls, we started building jumps, and we started just like borderline wrecking ourselves and breaking our bikes. And we would hook the baseball playing cards up to the back wheel to make it sound like a motorcycle. And, that was just like I was obsessed with bikes. I was obsessed with launching myself as high in the air as I possibly could. And so eventually I think my mom and dad realized like, okay, we need to put some framework around this for Shannon. Otherwise he's going to end up like a Red Bull Rampage kid. And so, like I ended up, like my dad was like, I'm going to take you to a place called Capital City BMX. And it's like that whole culture is like still to this day unchanged, right? Just like everyone drives a diesel truck, like the Igloo coolers are busted out, and it's an all-day affair. And it was really cool. I loved it. It was all about going fast, hitting jumps, but also really getting through them as quick as you could. And I worked through that for many years. I had the red line, like super ultralight bike with the skinny tires as tight as you can get, like in many ways, like what gravel bikes have kind of become.
Yeah.
That was kind of funny. And so, yeah, I went down that path for a long time until we had a tragedy strike in our life. And we lost my younger brother, who was 2 years old at the time, and I was 9 years old. And that for about a year made our road pretty rocky, and we ended up moving to a different part of town. And once we moved, it just didn't make sense. The BMXing was kind of too far, and all of a sudden mountain biking became more of my focus. But really, once high school set in and football and all those distractors in life, I think I didn't walk away from the bike. The bike was always there, but it certainly wasn't my obsession for a really long time.
Yeah.
So.
And I think that's a story for a lot of us at that time, like that time in the world. Like there just wasn't really there weren't bike racing and like mountain bike, like NICA didn't exist when we were teenagers. There wasn't anything pushing you to like continue mountain biking in high school, but there's so many other inputs like on your time. So it makes perfect sense. Okay. So you're shooting weddings. You're like deciding you kind of want to get into this whole video thing. You haven't ridden a bike or, you're riding bikes or whatever, but like you haven't like seriously been into bikes for quite some time. Yet somehow you come up with the Call of a Lifetime series.
Yeah.
What the hell?
Well, okay, I'm gonna go down another road of compressing time, right?
Yeah,
So
like we've got the Wayne's World, like
no, it's cool. This is like let's set a good floor. Let's get a good baseline, because obviously a lot of this call we're just gonna be focused on Call of a Lifetime and digging in deep into that. But I think, again, in the effort to not drag this on to a Joe Rogan 4-hour podcast, we'll just compress some time. So shooting weddings, honestly, people would be like, hey, what do you do for a living? I'm like, I shoot weddings. And I always it's not that I was ashamed of being a wedding photographer. It just wasn't fulfilling to me. I knew every time the words came out of my mouth, it was good money. Like actually my sister and I saw a lot of success. We were doing really high-end weddings. People were flying us to Iceland and to London. And, just like, it was kind of cool. It was very niche. We were more quality over quantity. And we were very rewarded in that, but I just knew it wasn't my identity. I knew I wasn't fulfilled. It wasn't the ceiling. It wasn't the thing that the hill I wanted to die on. Mm-hmm. And so, I was at that point, I'm way into fly fishing. I love saltwater fly fishing, there's kind of a niche culture of fly fishermen. You have like the old grumpy guys that like get on the river and then like sip fine wine at night. Then you have this subculture that's actually becoming a dominant culture within fly fishing, which is like punk kids, like the same culture that you'd find in like mountain biking, honestly, like a little counterculture. And because fly fishing takes you and allows you to interact with the landscape, much like mountain biking or gravel riding, in a unique and different way, right? You look at landscapes different depending on what vector you're trying to engage it with. And fly fishing was this fun way to go adventure. And I love water. I love being in water, underwater, especially do a lot of underwater cinematography, but I just love water. And so all that to be said, I ended up making a film in the fly fishing space. And that was kind of like my first cutting my teeth. I self-funded it. I think I like pulled together like $10,000 and just totally invested in myself and like rented the Red camera and like, you know, like literally was like looking up tutorials, rented this thing, was driving to go film fishing, was like YouTubing, like, okay, how to screw the monitor onto the camera, you know, like on the way to go do the filming, like totally faking it till you make it mentality, but just nothing was going to stop me at that time. And I look back at that video now and I laugh, right? It's really bad, but it was the first. And it also taught me that next step. And then I ended up, you know, this is the emergence of the brand films, like short films. You know, there was this bubble, right, that was created. And starting in what was that, 2015 or so, the bubble started, and I really think it's just now starting to pop. I think we're going to see a lot fewer, you know, 15 to 25-minute short films that are driven by brands. But for that era, I just caught the wave, like right on the front end. And before I knew it, I was playing with six-figure budgets, and yeah, it just launched me into storytelling. And that's the thing. I think that's in an effort to, again, continue to compress time. The thing that like I gravitated toward wasn't just fly fishing films. It wasn't just cycling films. It wasn't hunting film. It was just, I found storytelling to be a unique challenge. And I think the thing that I didn't want to be defined by some niche genre of filming. I just wanted to be focused on something timeless. I wanted to create films that created introspective revelations within us. And, you know, the outdoors is the ultimate healer, right? Like when we go spend time in nature, you know, like it's like that one of my favorite quotes. I forget even who said it right now, but it's, you know, if you're mad, if you're frustrated, go take a walk. And if you're still mad and frustrated when you get back, go take another walk, you know? And it's like, I truly believe, and I live a lifestyle, and I have 3 children, and we push them into a lifestyle where we spend as much time outside as possible. And I've found that the greatest vector for telling some of the most important stories of our time and of the past and potentially of the future are going to be founded in the outdoors. And so that's my niche. That's my genre, is like I use stories based in the outdoors to, you know, do what we do best, connect with other human beings. And that's my whole vector. That's my whole focus. And that's what eventually led me to Lifetime's doorstep, which is where the idea for Call of a Lifetime began.
I love it. I love it. Also, you must be a Shimano guy at this point, between the fly fishing and the bikes. Just really
100%.
feels, yeah, like you don't really have a choice, right?
Yeah, Shimano all the way. Yeah, Shimano and Trek are my go-to. So
okay, we love that on this podcast. My husband Peter, my co-host here, is also a Trek athlete, so we're right there with you.
Yeah, no, I'm all about it. In fact, moving forward, I'm gonna call Trek up and let them know that I'm ready to create a sponsorship with them, because we need some e-bikes and stuff to film these races.
Ooh, I love that.
We need a bike sponsor as the filmmakers, because what people don't realize is it is incredibly challenging to actually film bike racing.
For sure. Yeah. And I mean, actually e-bikes, now that you mentioned it, they would solve a lot of the problems, because one of the constant like complaints from the racers is always the dust that the vehicles that are filming kick up. Right. And I've heard this, you know, not from Call of a Lifetime specifically, but like all of these gravel races that are trying to
course.
do full coverage, right? You have ATVs and you have like actual like pickup trucks on the road. And I've been in these pickup trucks, like trying to do some of the live coverage, and you're just dusting these racers the entire time, even though you're not going overly like quickly. But
Yeah.
an
No,
e-bike,
you
ooh,
certainly can. If you don't know what you're doing, you can really, you know, and that's always our goal. You can really kind of alter their race experience, and that's never what we want to do. And so we've got formulas and strategies, but we sacrifice a lot of good imagery. We sacrifice good moments because we don't ride in front of the riders. There's that, and there's also the draft issue. And so, you know, I think, you know, it's funny, riders, it's like you're part of the film crew, and you know, here we are just like trying to create good coverage so people can enjoy the race experience. And sometimes I do get frustrated because if they can grab a draft, they'll take a draft. And that's frustrating because I'm like, man, I'm just trying to get my shot, and they'll pull in right behind you and you got to move on. Because like,
and
no,
now,
it's a disadvantage to give someone a draft, and we can't be part of that problem.
and now you've broken the spirit of gravel.
I've just beating it up. Oh, the spirit of gravel.
Yeah. Okay. So you got back into riding, like you've made your comeback in the past year. Was it doing Call of a Lifetime that got you back on the bike, or was it like which begat which?
Yeah. So, you know, I guess before we get there, because we're jumping some time, it might be better just to talk about how Call of a Lifetime came to be.
Yeah.
And
Let's talk about that.
And so, and then we'll get to that part. But season 1 of Call of a Lifetime was essentially just when I bumped into Payson McElveen. And Payson McElveen, I'd made a Red Bull and Trek film of his white rim. Standing Man is what we called that film. And so that was technically like my first ever piece to direct in the bike space, was his Standing Man FKT attempt. Which he did, which is awesome. Proud of Payson. Payson is a longtime friend. He's also from Austin, Texas. So shout out. Always rooting for Payson. But Payson hit me up and was like, hey, man, I just caught wind. There's something you should know about. There's this thing called the Lifetime Grandprix. I'm part of it. I think it has potential to change the landscape in North America for cycling. And I was like, that sounds awesome. Well, you have to remember, this is like right after, I think, season 2 of Drive to Survive had been released. And I was amazed with, like, it was like a magic trick for me. Like, when I watched episode 1, season 1 of Drive to Survive, I instantly became a fan of Formula One. And as a film director, I admired and I appreciated how they totally brainwashed me. And I thought, man, how did they do that? And so I totally just like went to school and studied their episodes and, you know, read the writings from their directors and, you know, followed the film team and just did as much digging as I could on the how and the why and the how to, for sure. And so that became a fixation of mine before Payson had even reached out. So my wheels were already churning in this, like, I want to create a series, because if you look at Drive to Survive and what they did, right, they didn't use, the racing is just the vector. The story what hooks you is the characters, because as human beings, we connect with other human beings, you know? And so they did a really good job using the characters to create a race series. And it was kind of a unique, first of its kind model. And, you know, on its emergence, now we see a lot of it. It's a bit saturated in it, but that's okay, because it's still cool. And I'm excited for that, because I thought, man, what an amazing way to pull people into and help people recognize and appreciate and fall in love with a sport. And as you know, one of the great challenges cycling faces is how the point structures work, the series. There's so many series. The points are pretty complicated. You know, like, it's not an easy thing to follow. You have to really care. It's not like, yeah. Anyways, that's what I liked about the Grand Prix. Grand Prix was very simple: invite only, cash prize, limited races, and an easy to follow point structure. Like, all the prereqs you need to build a cool film series. And so when Payson introduced me to the idea, I then was like really excited, because when I realized what this thing was and how it was pretty unique for North America, I thought, well, Payson, make an intro. And he did. He introduced me to Lifetime, and Forever grateful to him for that, because it led to a conversation that, ironically, Lifetime, Michelle Duffy, I think, is the first person I got on the phone with over there. And I think the words that came out of her mouth were something like, I don't, we want to invest, we want to create content around this series, and we're thinking something like Drive to Survive. And I was like, cool. Like, we're on the same page. Like, and at that point, it became this beautiful collaboration. And like, that's the coolest part about working with Lifetime, is I can tell you, 110%, like, their passion for creating fandom for these athletes and growing the sport in North America is very altruistic. It's not to say that they're not going to make a huge profit if the more successful it is, of course, like, that's awesome.
I think it's okay to acknowledge, like, I might get some flack for this, but like, that's how the sport continues to grow. Like, if companies aren't making a profit on their thing that they're doing, they're not going to be around anymore. So of course,
I think they've proven they're pretty good stewards of what they do with their profits. I mean, let's look at what they're doing right now. They are by no means upside right on the Lifetime Grandprix as a series and as a investment into the film, right? And their goal with creating Call of a Lifetime was to popularize, to make fans out of the key faces that are in this industry, and this kind of new athlete that's emerged out of it, right? This endurance off-road racer who has merged mountain biking and gravel as their fixation and is changing their training and giving everything they have. I mean, this is incredibly complex stuff. It's more than skill set, it's endurance, right? And endurance is a whole new beast. And so I think that, they've proven to everybody at this point, as far as I'm concerned, that they're in it for the long haul, and they are, if anybody's going to make it happen, it's them. And the hope is of course the bike industry can't support, probably, I don't think it's ever realistic to think that just the bike industry can support lucrative lifestyles and rewarding lifestyles, much in the way we see, maybe the old Tour de France, kind of paydays, or the football or baseball players, right? You need non-endemic sponsorship. You need outside partners coming in. And that's the thing that Lifetime is bringing to the table, is they recognize that, and they're doing everything they can to pull in non-endemic sponsors, and Mazda being the first. And kudos to Mazda. They've continued to go along this journey, and will continue along this journey. And I can't wait to see what other non-endemic sponsors come in. But that's the testament. That's going to be the thing that really changes the tide for the cycling industry and for these athletes who dedicate so much of their lives. I mean, literally, they sacrifice everything. They can't even live in one spot. They got to be at this altitude and this amount of time before this series, and then they got to be in this climate and this environment. They're literally moving themselves around the world for these races, and their commitment and to it is, as far as I'm concerned, I hope they find a way in time to get paid what they deserve, because their dedication is unlike anything I've ever seen. And that brings me to your other question, which is like, what inspired me to get back on the bike?
Yeah. And before we hit that, I mean, with Call of a Lifetime, I think this is actually one of the most interesting parts. There's always been cyclists I can remember 15 years ago, Jeremy Powers starting Behind the Barriers. There's always been some cyclists that were good at doing, we're not going to say like super high quality video, especially in the beginning when it was like flip cams and no smartphones, but like there's been a lot of cyclists doing video, telling stories that way, but not all of the cyclists within a series. So I think what's fascinating is you had a really big challenge of like, there's also the introverted cyclist, or the cyclist who's like not super comfortable, on camera and telling their story. So, I mean, that first season, how was it trying to, you have some athletes that are so comfortable on camera and so good at just like sharing their story, and like, it's like they've been media trained, and then others that are just horrified.
Think it has to do with how you started this phone call. Who are you? Where did you come from? No one knew who I was last year. Like, I don't have any name recognition in this sport, probably still don't, but the reality is, to a core few, that trust relationship was really, it took just that time. Time is how you build trust. And fortunately, I had a few allies, people like Sevilla LeBlanc and Cole Patton and Payson McElveen, who I'm literally like walking into Sea Otter last year, and what was that, 2022? And I'm like, a week before the race, being like, Payson, you might text this guy Keegan, like, seems like a pretty big deal. Like I really didn't know anything about him at that point. You know, it was a pretty big trial by fire, sink or swim, you know, of just educating myself on who is the best. And, you know, especially the first year of the series, we had no idea who would kind of who would thrive in this sort of race series. And so literally Payson and Cole are just like vouching for me, like, dude, Shannon's cool, I promise, like give him some time. It's like, dude, episode 1, season 1, like we're scrumming, like we're trying to figure out bike racing, like there's logistic, like it's hard. Like I don't care who you are, like, and you know, no one's done what we're doing.
Yeah.
Filming road racing is a cakewalk. Are you kidding me? Like filming gravel racing, like a bit challenging, not too bad. Filming single track mountain biking as a race, like as an endurance race, like come on, like
Yeah. And I mean, throw in like
doesn't get than that.
yeah. Sea Otter being the first race of the year, it's not only a race, it's also a huge event. You have to like get through the festival with your gear. Parking is somehow 18 miles from the venue. Like so many logistical issues with that. But you mentioned, yeah.
Well, I was gonna say, like that first episode, like man, it was really challenging. But at the same time, step by step, we gained the trust, and I was able to communicate the vision for what we were trying to create. And you know, like I'm super grateful for all the athletes because everyone, I think, sees it, right? Like media attention is good, right? Like media attention is what we need and really what we're lacking, right? That's how you build fans, is through media. And then that's how you get paid more money, right, is through more fans, because more fans are buying more bikes, and then more bikes means companies have more money, and when they have more money they pay you more to ride for them, right? It's a cycle there. And so a lot of people like Keegan saw that, right? And so many other riders, Hannah Otto and like Sarah Sturham and just like Haley Smith, and the list goes on and on. Like from day one, eager and excited, and just so helpful to me and helping me kind of get my feet wet in this space and with season 1. And humbling, like the most humbling point was probably after the race at Sea Otter year 1, where literally that morning or the day before, I was like, I need an e-bike. Like, I don't know how I'm going to film this race. I thought I had a plan, and our plan was like decent, but we just didn't. We totally underestimated how fast these riders were gonna go. Fortunately, we realized that the day before the race, and so we went literally walking around Sea Otter trade show floor, you know, the big arena there, and I just kept going to e-bike companies like, hey, do y'all have any e-bikes like I can use for the race tomorrow? And they were like, who are you? Like, what? And so eventually we found, I don't even remember the brand's name. I'm sorry if you remember this and you're listening to this, but like the reality is I don't remember. I remember it weighed about the same as my bathtub. Like it was so heavy. And the battery life on that thing was advertised probably at like 60 miles, and it like ran out after 15. And so I literally ran out of battery halfway through the race. So I'm pedaling this bathtub like up this hill. And mind you, like at this time, I probably weighed like 210 pounds, like 206, 208 pounds, I don't know, somewhere like that. It slowly crept up through the years. And so at this time, I had no, like, the bike was still pretty foreign to me. Like I ride sometimes, but not really, like gotten kind of out of shape, have 3 kids, it happens. And so I got back after filming the race. I'm like walking in, and there's like my team of 7 people, and I like sit down, and all of a sudden both my quads lock like Charlie horse up, and it was like I got electrocuted. And it's like still one of my favorite memories, because it was just this ultimate humility of just like, man, we got to figure out how we're actually going to execute this thing, because here I am seizing up, my quads like rolled up, I'm on the floor, you know that feeling, Charlie horse, my team's like, oh, I'm like screaming and writhing in pain. And like, yeah, it was just kind of a funny moment, and reflecting on that and where we are now, it just feels like it's been a pretty natural evolution, and that evolution has been a building on building, right? And that's where we're at now, is like, now I'm looking at season 3, now I'm looking ahead, and our logistics, our planning, everything just feels so educated, feels so dialed. I mean, I know the turns on the courses to film. I know where attacks are going to happen, and like, man, to compare and contrast that to year 1, it's night and day for sure.
I love it. I love it. So while you're writhing in pain, your quads are on fire, are you thinking, oh God, I want to get good at this? Or did that come afterward? At what point are you calling Cole being like, help me, please?
Yeah, at that point, I'm thinking probably something along the lines of like, how can I get inebriated as quick as possible? The reality is like, um, I'm pretty thick-skulled sometimes, and it didn't click at that point. I went through all last season one, completely being inspired and just blown away at like what's going on. There's certain people like Ellen Campbell, like she walked into that thing, never done 60 miles or 100 miles, and here she is attempting Unbound. And like, in many ways, as a director, you're a fly on the wall learning. You have to like, I don't know why I relate it to this, but like, you remember like Dirty Jobs with Mike Rowe and how he just like plop himself in people's world and learn everything he could to know about their world and their job and their trades, and like get his hands dirty with them. And then the next episode was something new. And so it's been a couple days in this person's world, seeing it the way they see it. And a lot of times I feel like that's being a film director. Like when you dive into something, you need to understand it from its most core credible components.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, my journey back to the bike, it was absolutely influenced twofold. One, just wanting to be fit and healthy, but also just realizing just like what the human body is capable of, and how it's all between the ears. And what happens between the ears is what determines what you're capable of. And to see that, to have a front row seat of that all season long with professional athletes who are great people, who are kind, but also just insanely dedicated, it lit a fire in me that was it's still burning pretty bright right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I was out yesterday, like wind chill of 13, my fingers numb. I did a 10-mile ride only because I've never done it in that wind chill. And I was like, I want to know what it's like. My cheeks are burning red. And like, I did this ride yesterday. And for me, it was the first time, that I've ever even considered riding, much less ride. I think I did like 10 miles yesterday, not much, but it's all I can endure. But I'm like alternating, putting hands in my pockets. I don't know anything about the right gear to do that kind of stuff in, and I'm just learning. And so I think, that's what lit the fire. But getting healthy was certainly, I have 3 kids, and it's like my dad's a bit overweight, and I don't hold that against him, but I also know it's in my genes. It's in everyone's genes. But a clean way of living is always been the goal. And so in April of this year, in March of this year, I was like, all right, meat and vegetables only, and that was my goal. I just went like straight meat and vegetables only for the first month and a half. The gym or the bike or anything, I got through Sea Otter. And then at that point, I started getting on the bike, and I'll remember that first 3 miles I rode. I live here in the hill country of Texas, which is pretty hilly. Like elevation gain over 5 miles is maybe 800 to 1,000 foot. So not crazy, but not nothing. And so, I remember that first 3.5 miles, like just whacked, like getting, like my wife is like, oh, like I'm sweaty, and it's Texas, so it's hot, especially in May. But I just remember being like, each milestone, each time I got on the bike, I was able to push harder and go further. And then, Garmin's and, like Strava, and all of a sudden I'm measuring analytics, and everything just became a step after step. And all of a sudden I'm 205 pounds. And then all of a sudden I'm like 195. And then like a month later, I'm like hitting 190, and I'm like, I can't believe it. And then, I keep hitting these thresholds, and then, I'm a hunter. I'm a bow hunter, and I went on an elk hunt, and I went to the Uncompahgre Wilderness in Colorado, which is very steep mountains. Somewhere 2 years ago, I would have said, no, I'm not going to go hunt that. And me and my buddy Noah Thompson went and hunted that. And I walked into that trip at 185, 183 pounds, and I came home 178. I couldn't believe it. I was like, man, I lost a bunch of weight, and I have not gotten heavier than 178 since September. And it was all because I just trained for the Austin Rattler.
Mm-hmm.
And I picked that as the light at the end of my tunnel. I was like, I'm training for this race, and I want to know what it's like to be an endurance athlete. I want to know what it's like to race a bike. I'm telling these stories. And then something unsuspecting happened. I walked into it with the goal to get healthier and just stop being frustrated with, not being disciplined. But then something really cool happened. I began seeing storytelling in the bike space in a whole new way. And that in itself kind of unlocked kind of where I'm at now.
Mm-hmm. Well, so that's actually, cycling is such an interesting sport because it's one of the very few sports where you can see like you can watch pro racing, but you can also participate in it, like almost
Right.
doing the same things that the pros are doing. So on one hand, I'm kind of like, I can see how getting on the bike would actually like enhance your storytelling capabilities, and like doing a race would like change how you're able to like tell the story about racing. But I could also see it from the opposite perspective of like not knowing about like what it's like to be in a race, because the Drive to Survive people didn't like
Oh,
do an F1 race. Like
totally.
they're doing
Totally.
it based on like, what the riders are telling, or what the drivers are telling them.
Right.
So yeah, how did that, I guess, yeah, how did it change like your perspective of it? And like, how do we see that play out in season 2, which will be out like a couple days before this episode airs?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I guess if you're listening to this now, the season's been released, so you should go listen or go watch it. But yeah, I think, to answer your question, I think walking into anything with fresh eyes is so valuable. And that is an ethos I live by, because I'm not afraid to go tell stories in any space. If someone called me tomorrow and wanted me to go tell the story of free divers in Tahiti, I'd say, okay, I don't know anything about free diving in Tahiti, but like I know story, and
Mhm.
story is what drives. And so I want to go explore this thing that interests me. And so that's how I approach the bike racing, and having fresh new eyes. I think you certainly will see it, much like the viewer, right? And so what we're filming and what captivates me as a director, and what I feel passionate to tell as a story, I would hope, and I think what we found is kind of some of that similar surface level stuff that I think anybody new to understanding off-road cycling, especially in North America, is probably seeing as well. And so, yeah, I fight to still hold on to that as much as possible. But in reality, as time has progressed, and what people will see in season 2 is, I'm a bit more nuanced, and that excites me, honestly, because I think
Mhm.
it's very legible, and I think it's very, you can follow it, no problem. You don't have to be some core credible cyclist and understand anything to be able to track along with these stories that we're telling. But I definitely found myself, I conduct a lot of interviews. I do interviews at every race. On average, I'm doing 15 to 20 interviews per race, most of the time with the same people, the same characters at each race, because my goal is to track the transformation of a mindset over time, right? And so that's that vector of story, because story is a journey, right? A lot of us in storytelling call it the hero's journey, but there's this idea that you have a known world. And season 2, for many people, their known world was the advantage of knowing the races and having a year to essentially recon the Grand Prix before they're doing season 2. For many faces, like the international riders especially, this is all very new to them, and
Mhm.
Danny Shrosby's out buying bucket hats because she's never seen a bucket hat before, like in California. And like Matt Beers is like getting humbled by altitude because he's never actually really respected altitude before. And so all of a sudden, for these international riders, it becomes this American code that they got to crack. And so, season 2 for me just became this nuanced approach to unpacking story in a new kind of perspective. And a lot of that I discovered on the bike. A lot of my perspective on racing, not all of it by any means, but a lot of it came from directly from the time I was spinning on the bike. And
Mhm.
that was pretty empowering and pretty cool. And in those interviews, we're sitting there. I digress. I got off the hero's journey thing. I apologize for that. The um, but the idea simply being that sorry, I just totally lost my train of mind. My daughter just totally fell down on her bike, of all things, right now.
Oh no.
I'm waiting for her to get back up, and she finally got back up. So I apologize for that.
That's too funny. Well, she got
No,
back up, so yay for her.
yeah, she did. Well, we try to teach that. Anytime my kids fall down, we say, "What do you do now? Stand back up." So to get back on track, the if I go back to the hero's journey thing, the idea and the goal is simply just to focus on defining what that known world is, and then unpacking these characters' experience through the year. And then my time on the bike really just showed me that what a rider's experiencing and how they're looking at their training and what they're thinking about when they're actually racing is very directly connected to the time they spend on the bike. And the more time I spend on the bike, the more I begin to empathize with some of the struggles that they were having. And so that's what I hope people walk away with, right? Is how we use these heroes' journeys with these characters to evolve their transformation and the perspectives over time, and how that defines them as a professional athlete, and how that definition of being a professional athlete in North America is this rapidly evolving thing. You have the spirit of gravel and like this movement, and it's changing. And certain people are upset that like the spirit of gravel is like 200 riders back, and when it used to be the front of the pack, but now competitive riders have come in, and now the pointing of the spear is, this is a very competitive thing, and there's strategy, and some of the strategy bothers people. Like you can do things like sit on a wheel and not take your poles, and that's a totally allowed strategy. It's not a way to get popular, but it's something you can do. And so all of a sudden, all these nuances just kind of just came to life for me. And so season 2 is a lot about, I think, a more educated and experienced approach to bike racing, and really trying to define bike racing and letting the bike racing come through the storytelling, so that while we're watching racing, we almost feel and see what's going inside their minds. And that became the vector for me.
Yeah. And I mean, with the nature of season 2, where there is more focus on a couple of the races, it's Leadville, Unbound, Big Sugar. Is that the 3 that have the like primary focus?
Yeah, so it's Sea Otter, Unbound, Leadville, and Big Sugar. Yeah.
Right. So it's a little bit less like just each race, there's like the quick, how it went. We can you actually can really dig into the nuance more. So I think like the structure of it lends itself to that, as well as your mindset going in. So on the bike, we talked about this last time we chatted, but we didn't get into the how. I asked you if when you're out training and you're riding, are you thinking about work, and are you thinking about like, ooh, this shot, or like, this is how I should change this, or this is like an editing thing I should do. And you said like, yes, it helps give you clarity. And I am the same way. How do you, when you have an idea on the bike, what do you do with the idea? Because you're on the bike, like, do you stop? Do you like record it? Like, what do you do?
No, this is actually funny. It was a problem I had to solve. And one of the ways that I solved it is just writing with earbuds in that have a microphone. And I'm just like, hey, Siri, can you make a note for me?
Love it.
Will you remind me to email Molly and thank her for the time with the podcast tomorrow?
Boom.
Done, right?
Love
and so
it.
I'm on the bike. I don't even have to take my hands off the handlebars. All of a sudden, I'm just making a note. I have a thought. I'm processing something. And what's unique about bike riding to me is, you is a flow, right? Obviously, especially single track. Like I've been doing a lot of gravel riding, and I like it because you can go far and cover a lot more distance, and I enjoy that. But like I just love single track, and there's nothing like single track that just emphasizes the importance of what's right in front of you. And so if you're like me and your mind can wander, like your daughter falls on a bike and you get sidetracked, I can't do that thing where my brain processes 2 things at one time, at least not deeply. And so when I'm on single track, I find myself in flow states. When I'm in a flow state and I'm in a rhythm, my mind is allowed to become fixated, and I can think. One of the things that works really well for me in filmmaking is scripting, but I have one of these imaginations, like I have wild dreams. My wife will tell you that every morning. It was like, man, you're moving a lot in your sleep last night. I have wild dreams, but I've always been able to completely visualize something. Like I can see an image in my brain very clearly. I can see the exact opening shot I want of a film. And so whenever I'm scripting, I'm like, my biggest headache is actually finding imagery to reflect exactly what I see. I become fixated on what I saw. And so I spend a lot of time in scripting, finding imagery, but thank God for AI. Oh my gosh, like text to image is revolutionizing my world right now. Like I can type things and then it learns me, and all of a sudden like my scripting has gone out the roof with productivity because of AI, but I digress.
Ooh, interesting. I love that. It's funny. And this is why I'm a writer and not a filmmaker, is because I'm the exact same as you. But I get so frustrated when I can't like when I wasn't able to do, like, I can't actually do the imaging because I'm not that kind of creative, but I can write it perfectly.
Yeah.
My descriptions get lengthy because they can be whatever I want them to be. It's great.
It's so much fun. It's one of my favorite processes. And so it's like the creative process, it's if anything, right? Like designing, like I'm a homeowner here in Texas and I'm an addict to remodeling our house, and I'm an addict to like dreaming what we can do next. And my current dream is finding a way to add more bedrooms and potentially a second story. And here I am on my iPad, like drawing it up and coming. And I love that creative process. It's why I do this job. And so the bike has become this really important vector. And so literally what I will do when I know I need to start thinking, I need to script an episode or I need to do anything, the first thing that I do is I go get on the bike and I get about 2 hours on it. 2 hour space on a bike is a really happy space for me. If I can go cover like 20 miles, 25 miles, something like that, depending on how hard I'm pushing myself, at that point, my brain is still healthy. I can still be really focused. I can think abstractly, and I just sit there making notes. And you'll also be laugh to know I take a lot of business calls on the bike. I'll be riding single track. There's good cell service where I ride. And if someone calls me, I'll answer it. And they're like, "Oh, you're biking again, aren't you?" I'm like, "Yeah, can you hear me?" I'm like, "Yeah, I got you." Like, cool, let's talk. Like I can have a full, thoughtful conversation on the phone too. So
I love it.
Being fixated on something and just being in a flow, it frees up my mind to become undistracted in its own unique way. So
fantastic. I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay. So, you and I have talked about this. I want to give context because I think our listeners, again, we're used to seeing videos come out in cycling all the time, but the work that goes into A Call of a Lifetime is vast. So give me the like terabytes, the hours of filming. Like I want the specifics here. What does a season take?
Yeah, I mean, my hard drives are look like people's whole computers, right? Like I think this season we're pushing the threshold of 100 terabytes of content curated. On average, we've got 12 people to 15 people in the field. We are breaking them up into units. Each episode, the way we structured this season especially was a unique challenge, something we deviated from last year. But, one of our driving beacons is, just equality between men and women's coverage. And so, there are certain races which are way more recognizable and just bigger deals than other races. And, Sea Otter, Unbound, Leadville, and Big Sugar are in this series are those races. And so episode 1 is a men and women co-ed episode. Episodes 2 and 3 alternate. It's an Unbound episode for women and then an Unbound episode for men. And then we do the same thing for Leadville, 1 for each. And then the final episode in the sixth of the 6-part series is Big Sugar, which is also a co-ed episode. So the idea being episodes 1 and 6, episode 1 is the questions being asked, the future, very much looking forward, setting the stage for the stakes, introducing a vast amount of your characters, not all of them, but a lot of characters, reestablishing last season's characters. And then, episodes 2 through 5 are really in that world of the here and now, the present tense, the building, the going along the journey, right? Going back to that hero's journey, you have your known world and then you cross into your unknown world. And really like Sea Otter was their first crossing into their unknown world. And when things really started getting shaken up and then Unbound, especially with the mud this year, like really like put people in different mindsets and it became a point of conversation. And so going with certain characters along those journeys to the season eventually brought us to the 6th episode, which instead of looking forward is very reflective. It's looking back. It's the popcorn episode is what I call it. You've kind of done your work, you've built your stories, you've introduced your characters, and now it's time to close your loops and pay off your mystery boxes. And this is all very much film language, but the reality is like it's a point to just really reflect back on the year and to ask ourselves the question of what was learned and to see that transformation walking into it. For example, you got like Brendan Johnston from Australia, first time in America, first time racing North American Series, walked into Sea Otter, and the question he poses, he just want to know where he stands. Like, where do I fit in this circuit? I don't even know. I could be last. I could be first. I have no idea. And so his world got rocked, and he almost jumped on a plane and quit and flew home after Unbound, and he didn't, and I'm proud of him for not doing it, because the season really turned around after that, and he really pressed into it. And so he went through his own valley of the shadow of death, like you think about, like, Lord of the Rings is one of the best films to talk about hero's journey, right? Because you have like Frodo and the Shire, and then you have Mordor and this journey he goes on, and like the ultimate return of the heroes when he goes back to the Shire, and he thinks it's this thing he's wanted the whole time, and then he doesn't end up staying in the Shire. He leaves, right? He's seen too much. He's done too much. He knows too much. And so it transformed him as an individual. And so when I'm thinking about characters and their seasons and this hard thing that they're doing, and when you're halfway through a season, what kind of mindset are you in? When you're looking at points and you're at Leadville and you only got 3 races left, like, what are you thinking about when you're walking into the last race? And, if you do really well, you're in the money. If you don't do really well, you're out of the money. Like, it's going to change for each person, depending on where they're at in the standings, on how they're going to approach the race, and how they're going to talk about their season, and how that's going to drive their desire to want to come back and do this thing again next year. Because so much of what keeps this train moving is people's investment and excitement for it. And so the question of, is this reshaping off-road racing in North America? I think so, right? Because we see people keep coming back year after year because it's still challenging to them.
Yeah. So, okay, who's our Gandalf in Call of a Lifetime? Like,
He's the Gandalf. Kimo is one of the best talking voices but I love his
I'll give you that.
Voice. Like, Kimo is totally like, I have a lot of respect for Kimo because he's got a hard job. It's not a popular thing sometimes, making the decisions that you got to make as, a race director, as the president of the company that puts on the races. There's a lot of points of criticism for anybody to make. Probably that all can contradict each other, like, you can't ever make anyone happy. And, I think Kimo's been really, really cool to work with, because I've just seen someone who has an ethos and a love and a passion for just that strive to continue to evolve.
Absolutely.
And to apply that to all things. And for the women's side of the racing, for the men's side of the racing, it doesn't matter. There's constant evolution on all fronts. And so just being good stewards to that. So I've constantly found, I usually look at Kimo to help tie the room together sometimes. And you'll see that in the series. It's like, man, you get this the best. Give me my 30,000 foot perspective. Help me to understand what's going on in the mind of these athletes so I can cue them up, and help jump from different parts of the world to the other. So
love it. Okay. Last question before we talk about where everyone can find the season and all this. What was your favorite moment of filming? Might not even be the most like important moment, just your personal, like, either, this was the most perfect vision or perfect answer, or just amazing moment.
Yeah, no, that's pretty easy for me. To see Brendan Johnston come place what he placed at Big Sugar, which I think was 3rd, which put him on the first step, I believe, if not the 2nd step for the Grand Prix. But following along his journey, I mean, literally like in tears in the interview room, like, he has a daughter and a wife, and he just, he committed. This is a hard career to be in, and he made huge sacrifices to come to America. And to see him really struggling, Unbound, he didn't even get to finish because of the mud. One of his quotes that you'll find in the series is, they say never to meet your hero. And for me, Unbound was my hero of gravel racing. Like, he really struggled. He was really, I've never seen anybody just get really put through the ringer to the point where, like I said, he was looking at tickets to fly home to wrap this thing up early and just say, I tried. And so I've got a lot of respect for somebody who can persevere through those struggles. And so he knows a bit about struggling, and he was diagnosed with cancer when he was 17 years old, and so he knows struggle. And he claims that this year he struggled even harder than potentially a struggle with cancer.
Cool.
And so, I have a lot of respect and empathy for someone that perseveres through that. And then to see him be rewarded, he was on the podium at the RAD. And I think, and then of course what happened at Big Sugar. And I know that was really validating for him, because he believed in himself so much, even despite a really rough start to it. And in the end, it put him in that top 10, and it got him an automatic invite to come back and do it again this year. And he's coming back. And I think that's really cool. So yeah, if I think about storylines that really warm my heart, moments that warm my heart, I think about being in the helicopter and filming, and just like, I literally welled up with emotion for him as I'm like flying that big camera in the helicopter, just like, dude, like, heck yeah, I'm right down there with you, Brendan. Like, I'm so stoked for you. And I don't know if these athletes realize how invested we get into them, and how much, like, just total fans, like we really root for them, I also agonize, like Sarah Sturm, like she's gotten second, she's gotten third, she's gotten fourth at Leadville, but she had never gotten first. And so I really wanted it for this year. I was really invested in that with her. And I really, as the race evolved, and again, I was in that helicopter filming, like, dang, I was just real bummed for her. Race didn't come together. She even said it before the race. She was like, I've got second, third, and fourth. Hopefully I don't get fifth. I want first. And so, but no, I think she ended up like seventh or something like that, or maybe further back, seventh in the Grand Prix. But all that to be said, yeah, that was probably my favorite moment, seeing that. But the mud was pretty rowdy. We thought we were going to get stuck with our big squad. And I literally am just like stressing out. I told the driver, who's one of my best friends in life, Brian Freeman, I told him as the race started, I was like, dude, I promise I'm not going to freak out at all today. And we have this funny GoPro, like we record ourselves filming. He sent me actually this funny moment where I literally say, okay, don't worry, I'm not going to freak out this year, because the start to Unbound is so stressful. And when you're in a side-by-side and you're filming riders and they're trying to pass you, man, if they get to that gravel before you do, but you have a police barricade holding you back, which is really difficult. So the police aren't going fast enough, and the riders right up to the police, and you get sandwiched in them. It can be really dangerous for the riders, for yourself, etc.
Yeah.
And this funny video is me saying, I won't freak out, and not, but it had to have been 30 seconds later. I'm like, watch out, dude, there's riders on our right. And I'm totally freaking out. And so when we hit the mud, it was like, we knew if we let off the gas at all, we were going to get stuck. And these riders are getting stuck. And so we ended up having to just like barge on through, film what we could. And then once we got to the top of the mud, I just jumped out and went slogging in the mud with a handheld camera. But that was a pretty wild west moment for me.
We need a bonus episode of Call of a Lifetime. That's all the behind the scenes. Would love to see it. But okay, before I let you go, tell everyone where they can find you, where they can find Call of a Lifetime, all the things.
Well, cool. Yeah. So listening to this right now, it is out. You can go to the YouTube channel, the Lifetime Grand Prix. I believe it's youtube.com/@Lifetime Grand Prix. And that is where you will be able to find season 2. If you haven't seen season 1, I might suggest watching that first, but that's up to you. Season 2 is definitely an improvement on season 1. So I'm very excited for season 2 to come out. And then if you would like to follow me personally, you can find me at Instagram, right? Shannon Vandivier is my personal page, and my company is called Collaborative. So
amazing. Shannon, thank you so much for taking the time to chat. This has been, as always, such a blast. We're going to have to do it again at some point in the near future. I feel like we could just keep doing this.
Well, thanks, Molly.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. If you want to hear more training, racing, and endurance sport advice, make sure you subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and review. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at consummateathlete.com for a weekly dose of inspiration and advice straight to your inbox.